a security panic state, which stripped away civil liberties and constitutional rights for the sake of the military-industrial complex. It's important to look at the events before, during, and after 9/11 in order to understand it. It is also important to look at who was chosen to investigate it. Two huge bills were created which have forever changed America: the Patriot Act and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. The Congress passed these monsters while it was under the duress of an anthrax attack. At the time, the politicians and the mass media pinned the anthrax attack on Al-Qaeda. The notes from whoever sent it read, "Death to America, death to Israel," automatically generating sympathy for Israel's struggle. Israel, a brutal apartheid regime, was linked to America's enemies. One lie led to another. First, Al-Qaeda was behind the anthrax attack, and then two more lies were created to connect Al-Qaeda to Iraq and Iraq to 9/11. The mainstream press never asked for evidence of the claims being made. They just repeated them obediently and blindly. Some were even dumb enough to take the Israelis at their word, as if Israel has never lied to the United States and would have no motive to implicate its enemies with such a tale. The London Times reported that the Iraqis were seen passing anthrax to Al-Qaeda. Their sources, Israeli intelligence. Here we can see the beginnings of setup. With this lie, they connected 9/11 to Iraq. There was no meeting in Prague. There were no Iraqis passing anthrax to hijackers. There were no Iraqis even talking to hijackers. Next, Iraq was said to be making biological weapons of mass destruction, including anthrax, in mobile weapons labs. This lie came from Judith Miller of the New York Times, the girlfriend of the lawyer for the Mossad, Louis Libby. Here's a woman who tried to blame both the 1993 World Trade Center attack as well as the Oklahoma City bombing on Iraqis. She claimed that Iraq was using mobile weapons labs to hide its biological weapons of mass destruction and was capable of producing anthrax. Judith Miller was also a journalist who got a hoax letter of anthrax. It's interesting because the first set of these hoax letters were postmarked by the real attackers before there was reporting on the anthrax. So why send Judith Miller and Fox News pretend attacks? And yet the attackers sent real anthrax to others who opposed the Patriot Act and the war. The formula is simple. 1. State Al-Qaeda attacked the U.S. with anthrax. 2. State Iraq has biological and chemical weapons of mass destruction, including anthrax. 3. State that Al-Qaeda met with Iraq. 4. State that Iraq gave anthrax to Al-Qaeda. All of these statements are lies, but it leaves the public with the conclusion that Iraq and Al-Qaeda were working together. Now, did Osama bin Laden set all that up? No. Osama bin Laden is dead. Later, neocons involved in the American-Turkish Council and the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee were fingered in illegal black market weapons trades, including nuclear material. Sybil Edmonds, the translator for the FBI, had the state secrets privilege enacted on her as a gag order. Every step has been taken to silence investigation, information, and legal action into these crimes. AIPAC was also caught spying on the United States, again. One of its moles, Larry Franklin, who was sentenced to 12 years in jail, was involved with the Niger forgeries, a bit of nuclear weapons propaganda which fit nicely with Judith Miller's tubes myth.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
If you don't know already, if you've been living in a cave or getting all your news from TV, these forgers were so bad that they didn't even fake the right name on the documents, and ignorantly used the name of an obsolete foreign minister who had not been in power for over a decade. It would be the equivalent of trying to pass off a modern document today and signing it Ronald Reagan, which is not even possible. This bogus information was used anyway, despite being debunked immediately, even by our own CIA. They knew it wasn't true. The CIA is evil, but they're not stupid. But it didn't matter, and they knew it wasn't going to matter. The press never took the 20 seconds or so that I just did to explain this, with the exception of Bill Moyers on PBS. All in one, you see the imperialist intentional deception and sloppiness with the media's yes-man partnership. They can't claim incompetence when they're the ones faking the documents, and the media can't claim ignorance when they will not report on the matter even after the fact. They lie to you together. The mass media is just a pro-war PR machine for the Pentagon. Franklin worked for Douglas Feith in the DoD, a dual citizen with Israel who met with uncleared Israeli generals in his office in the build-up to the Iraq War. Feith with Pearl set up something called IAI, the International Advisors Incorporated, in Turkey to act as a miniature ATC. Feith was a sole shareholder. It is essentially just another bubble to profiteer through. It's odd how the U.S. wrongly points his finger at Iraq and even Iran, accusing them of building nuclear weapons, and yet the real criminals trading nuclear secrets and possibly nuclear material are right here in our own government. Our Undersecretary of State and former ambassador to Turkey, Mark Grossman, is implicated in just such a crime. And even though he'd been caught red-handed with these dealings with the Turks and the Israelis, nothing could be done about it because the whistleblowers were gagged. To quote an old write-up from Justin Raimondo, one of the best muckrakers out there, immediately after 9/11, the FBI arrested a bunch of people suspected of being involved with the attacks, including 4 associates of key targets of FBI counterintelligence operations. Sibel heard the targets tell Mark Grossman, "We need to get them out of the U.S. because we can't afford them to spill the beans." Grossman duly facilitated their release from jail, and the suspects immediately left the country without further investigation or interrogation. That's the number 3 man at the State Department facilitating the immediate release of 9/11 suspects at the request of targets of the FBI's investigation. He's sourcing the Sunday Times, the same paper that Mordecai Vanunu turned to break the story about Israel's secret nuclear arsenal. Unfortunately, Vanunu landed in jail for that. It would be Mark Grossman who warned his associates to stay away from Brewster Jennings' a front for the CIA, particularly the wing that Valerie Plame was working for, which worked on tracking nuclear weapons proliferation. This became more public knowledge when Novak and Louis Libby told the world to stay away from Brewster Jennings and associates by ousting Valerie Plame as a covert agent. By ousting her, it was easy to deduce that the company she worked for must have been a front, and thus all of the CIA agents working for that were gone. They're pointing the finger at Iraq and Iran, but we know which country in the Middle East secretly has nukes. We know which cabal within the United States is selling this information on the black market, and it's in our own government. It's Feith and Pearl and Grossman and the same PNAC Zionist traitors that have led to the war in Iraq, helped cover up Niger, ousted Valerie Plame, and blackmailed politicians for their own financial interest. And who were the end buyers for these nuclear secrets? General Mahmoud Ahmed, the same man who wired $100,000 to 9/11 hijacker Mohammed Atta, who I've just explained was an Israeli agent. And from the general, it would pass on to AQ Khan, and from there to all the black markets, I assume to the highest bidders. Not only were they selling nuclear secrets, they were also selling hooking points, soft spots for blackmail, to manipulate U.S. officials. Sibel Edmonds made valid complaints about a colleague who was leaking information illegally. Sibel gets gagged and released from her position, but the woman she complained about turns out to be the daughter of an official who worked for the general. And what happened to the other leakers? Well, Robert Novak would die, Louis Libby would have a trial, be convicted, found guilty, and then Bush just commuted his sentence anyway. It's a little ironic that Louis Libby gets his sentence commuted by George Bush when Louis Libby was the lawyer for the Mossad agent Mark Rich, who got a pardon from President Clinton for his role in Iran-Contra, illegal money laundering, and not paying his taxes. You know, it could really come full circle here with Rich's partner Pinky Screen in the DynCorp sex scandal, but I just don't have enough time to get into all that. That would take a whole separate movie. Sibel's 3-hour interview report in a SIF facility for the 9/11 Commission was redacted, and I'd say about 98% of it completely censored. She may as well have been talking to the wall, because none of that information was shared. They just wanted to know what she knew. Oddly, a male hooker, Jeff Gannon, who Karl Rove brought in, who was pretending to be a reporter for a fake news agency, Talon News, referenced internal government memos about the plane affair before they were made public. This is a male hooker spending the night at the White House. I wonder how he got access to that information. And where was the ISI's general on 9/11? He was having breakfast at Capitol Hill with the director of the CIA, Porter Goss, and also Bob Graham from Florida, the senator for the Senate Intelligence Committee. Around the same time, Osama bin Laden's brother was having breakfast with George Bush's father to discuss business deals. George Bush Jr. was in Florida reading a book to some kids. Apparently this book had a little television inside of it which magically had the first plane hitting the towers on it, because Bush claimed not once but twice that he saw the first plane hit. That was impossible because coverage of the first plane hitting didn't air on the day of 9/11. It came after, when they found the French filmmakers who caught the attack serendipitously.
My chief of staff, well, first of all, when we walked in the classroom, I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error.
It's almost as if he had rehearsed what to say and then royally messed it up.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And
why didn't the Secret Service react after the second plane hit to get the president out of his publicly announced location if they were so worried about terrorism? And where was Mr. Dick? Dick Cheney was in a PEOC bunker making damn sure the next plane hit its target. Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta recounts.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Did Cheney order a stand down or a shoot down? Considering that he tries to lie about his whereabouts, and the little fact that the Pentagon was hit, shows that the order wasn't a shoot down, and the young man wouldn't be questioning the orders or quoting the miles either if it were. The 9/11 cover-up or commission will claim that Dick Cheney didn't arrive at the Presidential Emergency Office Center until 9:58 a.m. They can't take a later timestamp than that because we have a photograph of all of them at 9:59 when the First World Trade Center was collapsing. This is a half hour after Mineta overheard the conversation about the plane being 50 miles out. This would place Dick Cheney there after the Pentagon had been struck. And they will claim the conversation about 50 miles out and 10 miles out was about Flight 93, not Flight 77. There's a big problem with that. If they were talking about Flight 93, Flight 93 was never 50 miles away, much less 10 miles out. Flight 93 went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is a hell of a lot further than 10 miles from D.C. Norman Mineta arrived at 9:20, and Cheney and Rice were already there. Richard Clarke, the terrorism czar, stated in his book Against All Enemies that he arrived at 9:03, just as the second plane had hit the World Trade Center, and shortly after, certainly before 9:58, went into the Presidential Emergency Office Center to find that Cheney and Rice were already there, and recalls that later Mineta arrives at around 9:20 because they were looking for him. That means that Cheney was there between 9:03 and 9:20, if not earlier. White House photographer David Burrow would tell Peter Jennings at ABC News that shortly after 9, the Secret Service came to Cheney's office and said, "Sir, you have to come with us." And Cheney himself said on Meet the Press on September 16, 2001, When I arrived there in short order, we had word the Pentagon had been hit.